Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, June 29th meeting of Agricultural Affairs Committee. We're meeting today at Fred Baird Arena because our normal location, Ben Franklin Place, is packed with graduation ceremonies. And I felt I didn't want to stand in the way of freedom, so we moved here. All right, so declaration. Oh, I should just say, Councillor Hubly let me know last night that he wasn't going to be able to make it today, so it's just the four of us. Just the actual rural. Sometimes when I speak louder, it cracks. See, crack. That's not good. Anyways, so declarations of interest. Confirmation of minutes from the meeting of June 3rd, 2016. Carried. Communications, response to inquiries. It's an inquiry from Councillor DeRuse about 911 address blades. I believe the councillor has a motion to add it to our agenda for the next committee meeting on August 30th. If you want to go ahead and read that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My motion says that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve the addition of this item for consideration by the committee at the 30th August meeting pursuant to Section 89-3 of the Procedure Bylaw.
On the item? Carried. So that will be on our agenda for the meeting on August 30th. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 3 and 4 on today's agenda. For the items listed above, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available at the door with Joelle for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments. So on to the agenda. Item number 1 is the Thomas Baxter Municipal Drain, that the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend that Council appoint Mr. Andy Robinson of Robinson Consultants as the engineer of record to prepare a report under Section 78 of the Drainage Act to inform Council on the drainage works proposed, if any, that is required to address the proposed residential subdivision that will outlet into the Thomas Baxter Municipal Drain. On the item?
Carried.
Thank you. Item number 2, another municipal drain in Rito Goulburn, the Hawkins Municipal Drain, that the Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend that Council appoint Mr. Andy Robinson of Robinson Consultants as the engineer of record to prepare a report under Section 78 of the Drainage Act to inform Council on the drainage works project, if any, that is required to address the proposed residential subdivision that will outlet into the Hawkins Municipal Drain. On that item. Carried. Item number 3 is the zoning. So just before I get to items 3 and 4, they're impacted by a new bill, some new legislation from the province called Bill 73. It's at our last council meeting, council adopted a policy as to how to handle Bill 73. There's this new component which speaks to that we need to provide a brief explanation as to how public submissions, written, oral, are impacting the decisions that we make at council. So we did put something forward at council last week to deal with this prior to looking at it further in the governance review. This here just looks at it, just sort of helps us further between now and when we approve the governance review as to how we're going to approach this matter. And it's all about the Smart Growth for Our Communities Act, which made a few recommendations as to how municipalities are supposed to change the way that they do they recognize public input. So I'll just ask Councillor DeRuse to read the resolution at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Therefore, to be resolved that 4 items listed as number 3 and 4 of today's agenda, the committee coordinator will prepare summary of written and oral submissions for each of those reports to be presented to Council on 13 July 2016 that will outline the number of written submissions received and public delegations heard for this Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee meeting, as well as high-level sympathies of their main points, and will include the same for any submissions sent to committee coordinator by 4:00 p.m. on 12 July 2016, the day prior to council consideration of these items.
Thank you, Councilor Drews. So on that item.
Carried.
So now on to items 3 and 4. Item 3 is a zoning bylaw amendment for part of 255 Wall Road. One, that Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to the zoning bylaw 2008-250 for part of 255 Wall Road to permit a lot coverage of 20% for a principal building as detailed in document 2. And that 2, approve the consultation section of this report be included as a brief explanation in the summary of written and oral submissions to be prepared by the city clerk's and solicitor's office and submitted to council in tandem with this report, subject to submissions received between the publication of this report and 4 p.m. on the day prior to council's consideration, which is July 12th. So on item number 3, carried. And item number 4 is the last item on the agenda, and we do have speakers for it. It is a zoning bylaw amendment for 2605 Stagecoach Road, and the item is that Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend council approve a temporary amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 2605 Stagecoach Road to permit a takeout restaurant limited to a chip truck for a period of 3 years from the date of the passing of the bylaw as detailed in document 2. So this is an item just south of here, and yeah. Did you want to briefly introduce it before we go to delegations? Councilor Drews?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a temporary rezoning for chip truck on Stagecoach. And the reason for that, because before amalgamation, they were allowed to have these kind of facilities on the property. And since amalgamation in the zoning bylaw has some items were restricted and it was changed. So the owner tried to bring back this portable chip truck to be able to serve the community, because really we don't have enough facilities and places for residents to stop by and have a little bite to eat or or take a break. And as you know, Stagecoach and Snake Island are truck route, and there is lots of travel happen on them. So for this matter, we were talking to the owner, and we realized there was no zoning for it, and we're not sure if this is something that's going to be there for long. So we're going to allow it to be there for 3 years, and if the owner decided to keep it, and if it's good for the community, moving forward, we'll relook about permanent rezoning in 3 years. So it's kind of a little bit 3-year pilot project, making sure that it's going to work well in the community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we'll go straight to our delegations. Our first delegation on the item is Marion Kay. Marion? Yeah, if you want to come up, just have a seat here. Thank you. You have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Okay. I own a house at 2622 Stagecoach Road. It is on the opposite corner of the intersection where a restaurant vehicle is proposed to be located. Both of these roads are narrow country highways, so the vehicle will be quite close to my house and several other residences on or surrounding that corner. It is a busy intersection with a lot of commuter traffic passing through. A restaurant vehicle at that location will create more traffic and noise, as well as a traffic hazard from increased vehicles turning out right into the intersection. It is an intersection that was not designed or suited for commercial business traffic on its corners. The restaurant vehicle will also create a lot of odor from the cooking of French fries, burgers, and other greasy-smelling foods. That odor will no doubt hang around the homes adjacent to this site. In the colder weather, there will be exhaust from cars left running while people wait for their food. All of the above seems very unfair to the adjacent residents. I am a senior citizen who rents my house to a working couple. The thought of inflicting more traffic and other noise, as well as odors on them, is upsetting to say the least. I depend on that rental income to supplement my pension. Anyhow, anything that might annoy and drive my tenants away puts my income in jeopardy. Furthermore, I think it very unfair that this permit is being issued for a 3-year term. What happens if the restaurant vehicle proves to be a terrible nuisance to all of us or results in traffic accidents at that intersection? Will we be stuck with it for 3 whole years? I hope that you will consider my request. As a long-term resident and tax-paying citizen of Ottawa, and will deny this proposed use, which is liable to be a great inconvenience and annoyance to all of us who live nearby. That's it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eschenshire, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, did I hear you right? You don't live in the house, ma'am? You don't live next to at your house? Your house is rented? I'm asking you, your house is rented?
I can't hear you, what you're saying.
Just asking if your house is rented. Do you have tenant or you live in the house next to the chip wagon?
I still can't hear you.
He was asking if you live in the house or if you're renting it.
I'm renting it.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me? Okay. So
I don't know why I'm not hearing you, but I'm not.
yeah. I don't know what to say. Yeah. No. All right. So there's no other questions. So thank you. You can sit down.
Thank you.
Hi.
You can take a chair.
I can leave?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have another speaker on the item. It's Mr. Richard Woods. Thank you, Mr. Woods. So you have 5 minutes as well.
Thank you very much for allowing me to address the committee today. I think that you people do an excellent job in the rural area for creating jobs and keeping business going. The Osgood Tire is a very, very well-established business in the ward. It's been there for since 1998, and it is an excellent business that is this working? All right. That has been around for quite some time. It employs at least 20 employees, services vehicles not just from the ward, but certainly outside the ward, including trucks. The facility is extremely clean. The owner makes certain that his operation is cleaned every single day. And the property itself is extremely well maintained. The proposal to establish a chip wagon really raises the question of why. And I think that's very important. The location of Osgood Tire is pivotal in terms of the support for this proposal because for 7 kilometers radius around that area, there is no food services supplied whatsoever. The employees have to move out of the area in order to find food, and the customers themselves are at a disadvantage as well, particularly at lunchtime. The 3-year proposal, I think, is essential to make this a viable business, and I speak in my capacity as former Director General for Small Businesses and a member of the board of the Business Development Bank of Canada. The 3 years is essential in order to allow one to determine whether or not the business is in fact going to be viable. So I think that it serves the needs of the community extremely well, and the proposal does. The only thing I would like to raise here is something that is more pivotal than anything else, and that is, how do you define a chip wagon? If you look at the definition of a chip wagon, the way it was in the last century, it had tires on it. This particular facility that Mr. Kearns has brought onto his property really is clean. It's very functional. It was brought in by a flat truck, and it was lifted into place with a forklift. So if one allowed to move it again, you'd do the same process. If it was a truck with tires, after 2 years, you probably have to have it towed away. And I think the concept or the definition of what constitutes a chip wagon really should be thought about by the city and the city planners as well as to what would work and what would not work. And I think that's the point I'd like to make. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just on the last point there, that issue is more of one with the licensing folks. It's not so much the planning department at the city. It would be the licensing folks have a certain definition for what it is. So when it comes to that point where it comes to getting licenses, that discussion will have to occur with licensing to determine what is or isn't a chip truck. It's not up to committee or to the planning department to specifically determine that. And that's, I've spoken to your to the owner about that before. But that's something that can be taken on after this. Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have any questions for the delegation? Mr. DeRoos?
I just want to thank Mr. Woods for taking time and coming here on behalf of Osgood Tire. I know you do lots of work in our community, and also he was one of the founder of Osgood World Business Association. For that, we really thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Woods. We do have another speaker registered to speak on the item. It's Mr. Trevor and Marguerite Brown. So, Mr. Brown, if you want to come up, you have 5 minutes to address the committee on the item.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Sensitive microphone. Yes, so my name is Trevor Brown. I represent myself and Marguerite. We are next-door neighbors to Osgood Tire. We've been there for 13 years as homeowners. We probably would be impacted the most by this rezoning application. I agree with the previous speaker's comments that Osgood Tire is a very good business, very good for the community, good for the economy, and they do run a very good business. Our main concerns are several. The definition of a chip truck in the zoning application is, my understanding anyhow, that is mobile. It doesn't appear to be a mobile chip truck. It appears to have a foundation. It appears to have power routed to it already. And I'm just wondering how power was routed to it without, normally a chip truck wouldn't have power routed to it. So that's a concern of ours. The fact that it's built permanently, it appears to be built permanently, you know. It appears to have, has a porch attached to it. It has power attached to it, and I believe a septic tank as well. So our other concerns are mainly to do with the increase in noise, lack of privacy, lack of enjoyment of our property. There is no separation between our property and the tire shop. There should be, at bare minimum, a hedge put up. So we are concerned about the increase in traffic, the increase in noise. Certainly the office hours of the truck shop. I'd like to know what the proposal is, because it wasn't clear in the documentation that we read through. You know, I don't know if we have any input on that, but I'd like to see it, you know, within, like, kind of mirroring the office hours of his company, if that's a possibility. We don't want it to be open at 7 in the morning and then, open till all hours of the night. So yeah, I mean, please receive our feedback. We've been part of the community for over 13 years. We're hardworking, tax-paying citizens, and we certainly deserve to have our voices heard here. We've been in a bit of a struggle with Brian the last few years, ever since the tire shop went up. We've been asking him to fix the drainage because the water off of his tire shop is going underneath our driveway and into our septic tile bed. Potentially it's going to damage it over time. And the other main issue was the privacy, so that's certainly linked to this rezoning. And anyhow, I really appreciate the Affairs Committee time today. And do you have any feedback for me?
I know Councilor Blair has a question. I'm just going to mention a couple things first. I've been out to the site. It isn't permanent. It's not on a foundation by any means. It's sitting on blocks.
Okay.
The skirt around it doesn't show that because it's skirted to make it look more aesthetically pleasing. Okay. Behind the skirt is just blocks that it's sitting on. It is not attached to any sort of septic system whatsoever. I believe there's wires that run to it that provide it with gas line and power, but those aren't in any way put into a permanent state by any means. So it isn't. I mean, I think the argument that's out there is define mobile, and I think the applicant has come forward and suggested what mobile is in his mind. I think that there are other people that feel mobile is different. That's an interpretation thing. I mean, I
get it. It's a trailer essentially. It could be picked up and.
Yeah. I used to live in a mobile home. I can tell you it wasn't that mobile, but it had been there since 1974. But yeah, so that's on that part. That is the issue there. I'll let Councillor Blais ask a question at the end.
Thanks so much. Just for clarity of my own mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems your concerns are more related to kind of good neighbor practices as opposed to selling hamburgers and French fries in that particular location. Would that be about right?
Right.
Okay. And so I guess I'm looking at Councillor DeRuse, and maybe Mr. Markey can provide some input on this. Given the fairly unusual nature of this particular report, would it be appropriate to have some kind of annual feedback to the committee on how it's working with regard to an array of issues?
Mr. Chair, I acknowledge this is an unusual report, and I will confess that I was part of those that recommended that this approach be taken because of some of the confusion that had occurred over the zoning history. And because of that confusion, the original unusual circumstances, that's why a recommendation was made that it be a temporary zoning bylaw. It is for 3 years. My recommendation would be if committee wants to go down the path that Councillor Blais is suggesting, because it's a 3-year bylaw, if the owner wishes to continue with this, he will have to make a normal zoning application with the fees and regular studies to continue with it, and that the committee could issue a direction that if a zoning application comes, that feedback on how the use has operated over the 3-year period is to be included amongst the documentation that's for the committee.
That seems perfectly fair to me. How do we provide that direction? Or I see Mr. Brownlee's writing it down. So
I think if the committee coordinator recorded this, if I may be so bold, Mr. Chair, the direction to staff, I think it's been done, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mark. I hope that addresses over the next 3 years. We'd be looking for the property owner to address the issues you were talking about in anticipation that he might make an application for a more permanent zoning.
What do you mean by saying that? Is it in respect to what? Privacy or?
Well, I think you would report back on the number of issues and conflicts that are in existence, at least that's how I interpret it.
Okay.
And so that would form part of the feedback if he does want to achieve a an extension or some kind of permanent zoning afterwards. So the committee at that time could then reflect on whether or not, frankly, he deserves to have the zoning continued.
When the rezoning application went through, did they look at the property borders and whether there's a separation between properties? Or?
So just to cut you, that, I mean, the issue before us is the chip stand, right? I mean, I think your concerns seem to stem back to the building of other facilities on site. This certain facility is nowhere close to the property line. There's other structures on the site that are close to the property line. So the conversation today doesn't really pertain to property lines. There's really no, even going forward when we look at the rezoning in 3 years' time, if that application comes forward, it will speak to specifically this use rather than pre-existing uses or what was approved previously under Osgood Township or even with the construction of the second garage, which I believe was done in the City of Ottawa. So that would have been dealt with at that time. There's nothing before us today that looks at those existing issues that you might have, aside from working with your councillor on those and hopefully with the property owner itself. But there's nothing that this committee can do to address historic issues that you might have with the site.
I understand.
Councillor Drews.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown and Mrs. Brown, for being here today. I know I've been dealing with you, working with. I know there is a site issues has been happening from way before my time, and I want to also thank the staff, Adam Brown and their team at the Rural Affairs Office, working closely between yourself and Mr. Greens for fixing and eliminating this issue. Always there will always be some issues between neighboring and adjacent property, but you and your wife has been very understanding and working closely with my office and with the Rural Affairs Office, and we're going to keep doing so even with this process. I know this application and what we're doing today, it has no implication at all within the past issues that we have. We're still working with the three of us on making sure we have a compromise for all of you, so we'll be able to put all these issues behind us. And I'll assure you, my office will be working with you if there is any noise or anything issue, because I know Osgood Tire are a great corporate citizen in our world, and I work with them a lot, and I don't think they'll accept anything like this to happen in their property. So I'm confident that there is some issue from the past, and we are working slowly towards them, and I think we're 80% there. We still have that 20%, but I just want to acknowledge that on the record and making sure that you know that we've been working, we've been putting lots of hours and lots of negotiation on this file. And that rezoning 3 year got nothing to do with one and another, and I'll make sure we'll keep working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking the time for being here today.
Thank you, George. I appreciate your comments.
Councillor, thank you, Mr. Brown, for coming and speaking today. Appreciate that.
No.
So just in summary, I think you've spoken on it, but I mean, in summary, the important thing to notice here is that this is a temporary rezoning. This is a rezoning that will give the city the opportunity to understand what issues might arise with something like this. It gives the opportunity to the property owner to prove that it isn't an issue and that it's a viable opportunity for him to proceed with this type of facility on this site. It's an interesting zoning because the zoning is specific to the current use. It's an exception. If there was no exception, we wouldn't be here. The reality is the rural commercial zoning does permit this use, but this site specifically had an exception to only permit the existing use. There are many other sites in the rural area that are zoned rural commercial that would not have to go through these same hoops to do what's being done today. So this is just an opportunity, again, for the city, for the property owner, a 3-year window to be able to operate and understand what the impacts of that operation are. And it's incumbent upon the property owner to address those issues as they come forward, because if this is a long-term venture, then they'll have to go through the proper rezoning when the time comes for a proper rezoning. Oh. If anyone's listening to the audio later, they're going to hear me once. So, all right, so any further questions on it? No. So on the item? Thank you very much. And that's on items number 1 and 2, and that, which is the 2, is the brief explanation. In-camera items, there are none. Information previously distributed. It was just an update on the work program to complete the official plan amendment 150. That's, some of you may know that has been deferred as we await the conclusion of 2 studies, of which Councillor Blais and I happen to both be involved in. The land evaluation area review that Councillor Blais and I sit on, as well as the employment lands study, which Councillor Blais and I also sit on. So I assure you, it's not our fault. It just appears that him and I are both involved in the 2 things that are holding up the OPA 150. I don't know how that works out.
Perhaps if we got more favorable policy treatment.
Oh goodness, turn your mic off. So on that item, that's fine. Open mic session. I don't think anyone's speaking open mic session. Notice of motion. I have one. Notice of motion. It's just a commemorative naming that doesn't necessarily fit the commemorative name policy. And we'll deal with that at the meeting on August 30th, that a future park in Richmond be named after Sarah McCarthy, and we will again deal with that at the next committee meeting in August. Any inquiries? None? Other business? Adjournment? Carried. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, August 30th. We'll be back at Ben Franklin Place for that meeting. Thank you.